if China were very confident that they will overtake the U.S. in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, in terms of GDP, I think you mentioned, then you would counsel patience. They should be very patient with, I guess, Taiwan, with Philippines, with the provocation by the U.S., etc. Well, my question is, what if China were not so confident? Then would you counsel them being impatient and take preemptive actions against Taiwan, Philippines, India, and seek more provocation, provoke even the U.S.? Because I think U.S. Tariffs and trade sanctions, technological sanctions have done a lot of damage. But I think, in my humble opinion, I think China has also damaged itself through its own policies. Beating up big tech. Somehow they think only hardware is tech, software is not tech, and then the property mess and so on. Which they didn't burst the property bubble. They just killed the private developers. Good things. Ronnie is surviving very well. But so in my opinion, I don't think China has been that patient. But in particular, if they were not that confident that they will overtake the U.S., would you counsel them impatience then?
Now I know what's wrong with Hong Kong. We didn't have to fight. 1997, everything was prepared by Beijing for us, and the British were left with little choice. And so Hong Kong became part of China again, like since time immemorial. And it's too easy. And so we didn't have any struggle, any fight. I'm not proposing that we Hong Kongers should go through a tough time. I'm very thankful that Hong Kong was able to return to China in a very, very peaceful way. But that comes with its baggage, as we all know. From your perspective, Kishore, looking from the outside, and as a friend of Hong Kong, I know you. We have known each other for a long time. As a friend of Hong Kong, what can you advise us? Do we need to develop politically savvy individuals? We just don't. Civil servants are not meant to be politicians. They did not have the training. In fact, they were prevented from touching politics under the British. And after 1997, they are thrown into the lion's cage and they have to become politicians. And it's very, very tough. Both the ones like Sik Tung, who were brought in from the outside, or the civil servants. Do we have a chance of producing great brains like Singapore does in geopolitics?
Well, I think you're right when you say that Hong Kong didn't have to go through any struggles. You made a peaceful transition from the end of British colonial rule to becoming a part of China. But I can tell you one thing, in case you're all bored, the next 10 years will be very exciting for Hong Kong, because you have become a key political football in one of the greatest contests of all time, in the contest between the United States and China. So Hong Kong will be kicked around, as a football in this game. So I would say that if ever there was a time for Hong Kong to develop geopolitical reflexes, it is now. You must actually understand the forces that are operating against Hong Kong. And there are various things you can do, by the way.
Such as?
Number one, I'm not sure whether you have put together, it doesn't have to be a public declaration, at least have somewhere in the Hong Kong government a small private think tank that tries to monitor the great big geopolitical game that is being played between the US and China, and how it's going to affect Hong Kong. So you must at least have a team studying all the moves and the consequences.
The last CE of Hong Kong dismantled that. He ended the CPU, which is a Central Policy Unit. So we're going the wrong direction. What's number two?
Now, number two, I would say, you're right, you're part of China. But remember, it is not one country, one system. It's one country, two systems. And what you need to emphasize is not just how you are part of China, which you are, but also how different you are from China, right? You have the British legal system, and you're clearly not a Chinese city in the way that a city in China is. And what you can do to help deflect the geopolitical pressure coming towards you is to emphasize that you are different and that you are, in a sense, you're part of China, but also have a different system. And as a result of that, at a time when American politicians are trying to isolate and bring down Hong Kong, you can become a magnet for global talent. And the global talent will come here because they're, on the one hand, interested in China, which is frankly still the world's fastest growing economy overall in many ways, and at the same time want to live in a place that is close to China and yet also different. So at a time when many of the major Western countries are shutting their doors to global talent, United States is, Donald Trump wants to close the border, even Canada, the world's most open country, Justin Trudeau just announced he's going to raise immigration barriers. So that there's a tremendous amount of human talent in the world. So just as I was a young boy in a coffee shop with no hope of going to university, but I ended up going to university and then succeeding, there are lots of young people like me in the world who are looking for opportunities. And Hong Kong can attract that global talent. And if you can do so, if you become a magnet for global talent, then frankly, that will create a self-reinforcing virtuous circle that will strengthen Hong Kong.
You use a phrase that in passing, that I don't know if, ladies and gentlemen, you guys pick it up. I did. And the reason I pick it up is because it's exactly the same thing I've been saying for the last couple of years, and I find no resonance among my friends in Hong Kong. You said that U.S. is trying to bring down Hong Kong. We are collateral damage. We're not the main target. But in order to hit Beijing, you hit Beijing's son, so to speak. And hence, you give Hong Kong hell, especially as a financial service center. If America doesn't hit you hard in that area, I think America is asleep, and America is not asleep. And yet, what I'm afraid is, Hong Kong people are asleep. Hong Kong government is asleep. And by the way, we are more left than the Beijing leaders, it seems, to be more like them, so to speak, rather than emphasizing, as you have proposed, the uniqueness of the two system. Now, in the old days when Anson Chan used to propose one country, two system, to the neglect of the one country, I was the first one against her. Now I'm saying that times have changed. Yes, we respect 100%, 150% the one country. But this is the time that I have to borrow a page from Anson Chan, not exactly, to emphasize the two system as well. So I think that Hong Kong is undergoing a lot of changes at this stage.
I think what Hong Kong needs to develop is a very high degree of sophistication in its understanding of geopolitical developments. And it's important for Hong Kong society also to develop that kind of understanding, because these are the forces that will be shaking you. I mean, you put up all these warnings, typhoon warnings, right? I mean, it's good, you should, right? You should have a geopolitical typhoon warning also. And put it up on the street and say, hey, a geopolitical storm is coming. And that geopolitical storm, believe me, can do more damage than your Typhoon Yagi can do. So, but you got to develop, therefore, the antenna, the capacity to understand what is going on, what is the game that is being played. And that, frankly, was the best legacy that the leaders of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and Raja Arnam, left behind in Singapore. Because Singapore, when it comes to geopolitics, is one of the best performers in the
Correct.
world, because we know how to manage all the great powers. In fact, even as you and I are sitting in this room talking, I was just on CNBC from 11:30 a.m. to 12 noon talking about the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Singapore. And Singapore is such a small country, and yet many of the world leaders come to Singapore to interact with Singapore. So clearly we know how to engage the great powers and how to deal with them. And that's something also that Hong Kong can and should develop now.
I can assure you, Kishore, Hong Kong does not have those kind of talents. If anybody know anything along that line, it's already in this room because they are my friends. And I am amateur, they are amateur. Are there people in Singapore we can engage to advise us, help us? Can you give us a few names, at least half as good as Kishore Mahbubani? Are there such people?
No. I mean, this is actually something that you have to struggle with yourself. I mean, you know why? If you don't feel the struggle yourself, you won't be able to understand the consequences that flow from it. So you have to develop it internally, and sometimes you will succeed, you will make mistakes, but it's actually the process of making mistakes is when you learn from what you do. So Singapore clearly has made lots of mistakes too, but it's from the mistakes that we learn what we did right and what we did wrong.
You know, Kishore, you and I agree that the world is a very cruel place. You said something in your book, page 85 or something, that Tommy Coe disagree, but I'm with you on that point. That is, the international arena is a jungle. There are laws, there are rules, tribunals, and conventions, and this and that. But they are only there as tools of the major powers. And it is very much a jungle, as you have described. But Singapore, on the other hand, was able to do things that are against the bigger boys. And you do things that are politically incorrect. And Lee Kuan Yew didn't give a damn about it. And he insisted on it. For example, Singapore's educational system, while educating every man and woman as much as possible, they also are very elitist. Today, in much of the world, including Hong Kong, if you were to use the word elite, that we are the elitist, we train elites, you will be banished. And Singapore is able to do that. Has Singapore lost that edge today because you are now wealthy? Or are you still bucking the trend, pushing the envelope, in doing what makes sense, frankly, common sense, and hence succeeding?
Well, I think the good thing about Singapore is that we have in some ways made a very important transition. Well, in the early years, we succeeded because we had very strong, exceptional leaders, as I mentioned. And we've had, I must say, this is unusual, by the way. I mean, if you look at the United Kingdom, for example, you look at the recent prime ministers. I mean, Boris Johnson was a joker. His successor, Liz Truss, was a joke. I mean, you can see, therefore, if a country like UK has difficulty producing great prime ministers, Singapore has been very fortunate. We've only had 4 prime ministers and 4 exceptionally competent prime ministers. Very different,
Agree.
but very successful in their own way. But this also reflects the fact that over time, as we have developed, we have also developed strong institutions in Singapore now. So, for example, in the early days when we started off, when I joined the foreign ministry, there must have been about 15 or 20 people in the foreign ministry. Now there are over 1,000, I believe, diplomats that we have. So we have grown significantly, and we have developed the institutional bench strength plus what you might call muscle memory. So we remember episodes and how we handle crisis. I mean, in my book, I describe what happened when Mr. Lee Kuan Yew very bravely decided to expel an American diplomat in the 1980s. Now that's amazing. In those days, the United States was clearly by far the most important country in the world. Singapore was a little tiny dot, as a little tiny red dot, and we decided to expel an American diplomat. And that obviously is a very risky thing to do. But if you read my book, you'll see how Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was very careful in the way that he managed the whole thing. And he could, as Giorgio once said, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is a man who can unleash a political storm and pull back a political storm.
Wow.
Now that takes incredible skill, by the way. Incredible. Lee Kuan Yew had that, right? But now we have developed the institutional bench strength that replaces some of these things.
Before opening to the floor, can you give us a summary of how you see the world today in no more than 5 minutes? You said that Hong Kong will have a hard time in the coming 10 years. I agree. And you said somewhere else that China will have a lot of challenges in the next 10 to 20 years because of the United States, hitting on China.
Yeah.
But can you tell us what you think, how it may end? Number one. Number two, what about some of the other major players in the world, like Russia, like Indonesia, like India, Japan? Can you say a few words?
Well, actually, to give you a decent answer, I must follow Fidel Castro and give you a 3-hour speech now. No, but I think if you give me 5 minutes, the thing that the key point I want to emphasize to everybody is, I'm very glad that I'm alive today, because I think you're going to see incredible changes over the next 10 years. The world is changing fundamentally on many fronts, okay? Right? I've spoken about the end of the era of Western domination of world history. That's happening as we speak. The return of Asia, that's happening as we speak. And all this is creating a whole new world order. Now, if I want to give a very brief summary of this world order, I describe it as a 3M world. 3M is not the company in Minnesota. But 3M stands for one, multi-civilizational.
Multi-civilization.
So because they're with the end of Western domination of world history, there are many successful civilizations in the world, including the Sinic and Indic civilizations, China and India rising clearly. And then number two, it's multipolar. So you used to have very clear centers of power, one or two centers of power. Now, you're moving in a world where there are many independent poles, and even some of the middle powers can assert themselves and behave completely independently of the great powers. So the capacity of the great powers to control the game in the way that they could in the past is diminishing.
Can you give examples?
Well, I give you an example. In theory, Turkey is a NATO ally and should be listening to United States and should be, compliant with United States. But Erdogan is completely independent. He maintains his separate relationship with
Russia,
Vladimir Putin, and he takes the independent positions on many issues. So that's one example, but there are many other such examples. I'll give you another example. Even as we speak, it's quite amazing. The Malaysian Prime Minister has decided to go to Moscow. Now, I'm sure that it's going to anger the United States and Europe, but he's saying, I'm an independent leader. I will do what I want to do. So the sense of agency that the middle powers have is more than it was in the past. And the third M is multilateral. And so you will see that as we live in a small global village where we live, everything is interdependent and we have to work together in a small global village, you need global village councils. And therefore, multilateral institutions, whether it's the United Nations, G20, or even regional multilateral institutions like ASEAN, multilateralism is going to become stronger and stronger in the world.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, now's the time. At the back, there's a young lady there. And then we have one that is, I believe, a Schwartzman scholar.
Yes.
Wonderful. We have 3 tables of them. Welcome. Okay, the lady first.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Professor and Kishore, Ambassador. I'm glad to meet you again because last Wednesday you have a talk at the Hong Kong U. You talk about the universality of the West in tackling the climate change issues. Actually, I have a question about conflict mediation because I'm a mediator and also a fellow to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. My question is, in mediation, we used to assist parties to identify common grounds or common interests. So, but there are also, although there are certain areas of common concerns about between the global south, between the global north and the global majority, such as climate change, combating terrorism and AI development, there appears no common grounds. So, as a peace advocate, can you give us some suggestions about how you can identify common grounds for peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building? Especially for climate change, there are also arguments about the principle of common but differentiate responsibility and respective capacity being criticized by the West. And also the EU is now imposing tax on the relative poor in developing countries' products through the CBAM. Thank you.
Here, Sean.
Well, that's I must say, that's a very good question. And if indeed we as a human species were becoming more intelligent and more sophisticated, one thing we should stop doing is stop fighting wars and go towards peace building, because peace building saves lives in wars, right? But amazingly, even though in theory we have become more sophisticated, we cannot stop 2 ongoing wars that are going on, the Ukraine war and the Gaza war. And that's an illustration of why, even with all the best peace-building efforts, you cannot stop those sorts of wars. But is there a way of making the world overall a more peaceful place? I think the answer is given by you when you say that we should look at what our common interests are. And certainly, fortunately for humanity now, climate change is not threatening just one country or 2 countries, it's threatening all of us. So the logical response is for all of humanity to come together and cooperate to deal with climate change. That should be the number 1 priority. But this is something, frankly, that people of my generation have not become convinced of. And in many ways, people of my generation don't worry too much about climate change because we're not going to suffer the consequences 30 years from now, right? Which is why the voice of the younger people on climate change must become much louder. You must emphasize to the world that forget the differences between US and China, forget the differences between Russia and Europe or Israel and Palestine. Focus now on the key overwhelming threat that humanity faces, which is climate change. So if you can persuade the young people to speak out more loudly, there will be a big difference. But at the same time, please make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get elected, because if Donald Trump gets elected, the fight against climate change is gone for 4 years.
The gentleman from Schwartzman, and then David Pong, and then there's table 9, and then I got Eddie. That table has two questions. The Schwartzman scholar, please.
Thank you, Ambassador, for coming to speak to us. My name is Arjun. I'm a Schwartzman scholar, and I'm a reporter for the Financial Times. I just moved here actually a month ago to cover Asian finance and business. Also, I'm a proud Sindhi. For those who don't know, it's the state on the border between India and Pakistan. So great to see a Sindhi on stage. My question is about the balancing act that Singapore is managing between China and the US. It seems like they've done a pretty good job over the past few years, but there's growing skepticism, led by this idea of Singapore washing by Chinese companies or sort of allegedly Chinese companies like TikTok, Shein. And it feels like there's more skepticism from the American side, especially of Singaporean capital that they sometimes suspect is now actually Chinese capital hidden. So I was wondering whether you think this is still tenable for Singapore to balance so well between the US and China, and if not, then what's the future?
You can see you have to be a Sindhi to ask a very good question.
You mean I asked all the wrong questions?
Sindhis are good. No, but you're absolutely right. Singapore is under a lot of pressure from both sides on this US-China contest, and it'll be a very delicate path for Singapore. But at the same time, one good thing Singapore has done, which is an asset, is that we have deep reservoirs of goodwill in both Beijing and Washington. And both
really?
understand how Singapore can be very, very useful. So there will be pressures, there will be efforts to say, don't do this, don't do this. But we do our best to explain to them why we do something. And if we believe it serves our interests, we will proceed. So if it serves our interest to have TikTok in Singapore, we will allow TikTok in Singapore. We'll explain why, and we will proceed on that basis. But of course, we also make sure that we don't do anything that they believe will directly harm them. So we will not do something that directly harms the United States or directly harms China. So there's a very careful path, but But what helps Singapore a lot is the fact we are part of ASEAN. And when all the 10 countries, ASEAN countries, come together and say that we don't want to take sides between the US and China, ASEAN creates a very valuable political buffer for Singapore. And fortunately, ASEAN's getting stronger. So I'm reasonably optimistic that if you had to list the countries in the world that can manage the US-China contest, Singapore will be one of those that can do so.
Can ASEAN speak with one voice?
No, ASEAN's secret is that we never speak one voice.
So how can you be a force?
But you see, that's exactly the mystery of ASEAN. You see, nothing is black and white. I mean, ASEAN is a remarkable political animal, right? In theory, you watch ASEAN is progressing. You watch ASEAN in slow motion, it's like a crab. It takes 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, 1 step sideways. ASEAN seems to be going around in circles all the time. But you look at ASEAN decade by decade, it's becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. But it does so by confusing Ronnie.
I reserve judgment. David Pong, and then Table 9 and Eddie.
David Pong showing steel. That was very funny. I think members and friends here would agree when I call you the rock star of modern geopolitics. My question is, democracy is said to be the most efficient way of running a country, and yet at the same time, the best business model is capitalism. And somebody even coined a phrase called democratic capitalism. But in fact, these two are diametrically opposite. One is power to the people, the other one is survival of the fittest. Are we going to muddle through this maze of dichotomy until one day somebody wakes up and then realize that they are the ones who should lead and start a revolution? Or is it another way forward?
Thank you. I must say I would call that a really brilliant question.
Cindy question.
I meant that quite seriously. Yeah? I can tell you that the advanced liberal democratic societies, which used to provide to the world models of good governance, they are all in one way or another failing. I mean, United States functionally, if you look at chapter 7 of my book, Has China Won?, has functionally become a plutocracy, right? And you're right, there's a tension between democracy, where it's government of the people, by the people, for the people, and capitalism, which benefits the richest, and the government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. And the United States, unfortunately, has moved towards plutocracy, and that's creating an incredible backlash. In the same way, many of the European Union members, as you know, are struggling. The far-right parties are winning. And France hasn't had a government for I don't know how long, several months now. Okay? So fortunately there's someone who's analyzed these questions quite well. He's a well-known Financial Times commentator, Martin Wolf, and he wrote a book called The Crisis of Democratic Capitalism. And if you read his book, he describes very well why there are tensions in democratic capitalist societies. And at the end of the day, you've got to create a very fine balance where you give something to capitalism, something to democracy, but don't fall to either extreme, because if you fall to either extreme, then your society is in trouble.
Table 9, and then Eddie, we have to call it a close. Stay behind and talk to Kishore after as he signed books. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ronnie. First of all, as a proud Asia Society member in Hong Kong, I just wanted to thank you for pulling off another very good event. I've been really enjoying, Ronnie, to you, I've been really enjoying the occurrences this year so far. And Ambassador Mabubani, I know you've been really rather unequivocal in your prediction that in the next 5 to 10 years, that the tension between the United States and China will only escalate, and you sort of alluded to that again when you were trying to put Hong Kong into the context in your sharing earlier. There was another very erudite scholar that I very much like, who is Professor Richard Wolff, an American economist from, I think, the University of I forgot the university he's from, but he went even bolder in his prediction of the endgame of the US-China contest. He basically said that sanity will prevail in the United States, and eventually there will be a future American leader who would say, okay, this is enough. China's not a force we can contain, and it's only rational for us to try to negotiate with them for peaceful coexistence. Pretty much like what Britain did almost 250 years ago, when its then Prime Minister, Lord Rockingham, began to seek peace terms with the American colonies, and which ultimately led to the recognition of American independence in the Treaty of Paris. Although I have to add that in that case there was a war, unfortunately, involved anyway. My question is, do you agree with Professor Wolff's prediction, or do you think that a peaceful endgame would more depend on China being tamed, as it realizes, okay, the US is such a formidable force that to which we would have to defer to a certain extent? What's your view?
Well, I must say I haven't heard of Richard Wolff, but I want him to be right and I want me to be wrong. I would be very happy to live in a world where the United States and China decide, okay, this is not rational, we should actually get along with each other. Because that's what I recommend at the end of my book, Has China Won?
I'm sorry, I'm listening to Richard Wolff right here. I'm sorry.
That was quick.
I was just listening to the guy. I apologize.
I'll try to listen to him also after this. But you see, the reason I can confidently predict that things will get worse is because there's a rock-solid consensus in the Washington, D.C. establishment that this is the time when the United States has to stop China. And the evidence is there, right? There are tariffs imposed on China, there are sanctions imposed on China, there are speeches against China, there is Kamala Harris saying that we will be number one, we will not let China overtake. So the conviction that the United States should stay ahead of China is very, very powerful. So it will not change overnight. But if indeed he's right and the US and China stop competing and start getting along, I'll be the happiest man in the world, because that's my dream.
He's from the University of Massachusetts. Eddie, Tam, you have the last question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Brilliant lecture. I also went to your lecture at the CCCW. I'm a fund manager and I'm an amateur commentator on world affairs in Hong Kong. It's a follow-up question almost to this gentleman's questions. I remember at the CCW you mentioned that U.S. is not going to change. So it's up to China. I think this is a response to Professor Li Chen's question. Like, you said it's up to China to decide how to respond to the U.S. challenge. And you said if China were very confident that they will overtake the U.S. in 10 years' time, 20 years' time in terms of GDP, I think you mentioned, then you would counsel patience. They should be very patient with, I guess, Taiwan, with Philippines, with the provocation by the U.S., etc. Well, my question is, what if China were not so confident? Then would you counsel them being impatient and take preemptive actions against Taiwan, Philippines, India, and seek more provocation, provoke even the U.S.? And also, one point on GDP, I think you obviously know that in terms of PPP GDP, China overtook the U.S. like almost a dozen years ago. It's only in nominal GDP terms that China is behind. But also, I make the observation that, in fact, the gap has widened back out. I think the peak was 80% of U.S. nominal GDP about 2 years ago. It's now back down to 65%. And mainly that's because of not only slowing growth in China, but because of deflation, which is a forbidden word in China, and also, depreciation of the renminbi. So in my mind, actually, I don't know how patient China has been, because I think U.S. Tariffs and trade sanctions, technological sanctions have done a lot of damage. But I think, in my humble opinion, I think China has also damaged itself through its own policies. Beating up big tech. Somehow they think only hardware is tech, software is not tech, and then the property mess and so on. Which they didn't burst the property bubble. They just killed the private developers. Good things. Ronnie is surviving very well, But so, in my opinion, I don't think China has been that patient. But in particular, if they were not that confident that they would overtake the U.S., would you counsel them impatience then?
I never counsel impatience. Because it's not just between U.S. and China. I keep emphasizing that the world is changing. That you're seeing not just the relative decline of the United States, relatively speaking. United States will still remain a formidable power, by the way. Never underestimate the United States.
Agree.
But the United States' capacity to get the world to agree to it in the way that it could in the past is diminishing. And the emergence of what I call the multi-civilizational, multipolar, multilateral world is good for China. And so if the forces of world history are moving in your direction, then you can be patient, right? This is not going to be an American century again. This will be the Asian century. So if indeed the tide was going against China, yes, maybe you might counsel something else. But the global tide is going in favor of China and all the other countries. Many of them in the global south. So there's no reason for China to get impatient at this stage. Of course, its domestic development is critical, and the most important thing for China is to ensure that it keeps growing its economy at least 5% a year, because that is China's long-term answer to America's challenge. And if they can keep on doing that, through whatever means, pragmatically make adjustments, change policies, go back to Deng Xiaoping's maxim, doesn't matter whether a cat is black, a cat is white, if it catches mice, it is a good cat. That kind of pragmatism that China has shown, if that kind of pragmatism can be reinforced, then China will be okay. But on the side of the United States, I would also encourage the United States to engage in some fresh thinking. And my successor as Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Professor Denny Kwa, has just published an article in Foreign Policy, which is a letter to the next president of the United States. And the message to the next president is, please don't worry, even if you're not number one, it's not the end of the world. Just relax and accept it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't know that to be a political analyst can be a rock star, but ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for the rock star of geopolitics.